Thank you very much, Susan, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me here in the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow. This is the latest in a series of speeches that I've given since the turn of the year, focused on the 4 core priorities that I've set out for my government. Those priorities are eradicating child poverty, stimulating Scotland's economy, ensuring high quality and sustainable public services, for example, through a renewed and stronger National Health Service, and tackling the climate emergency. Each has its own particular challenges. However, the topic for today, making the right choices in relation to the climate emergency, is the one that in political terms troubles me the most. For the others, while there is disagreement on points of detail, there is nevertheless a real sense of unity of purpose in relation to the overarching principle. As politicians, as a country, we are broadly and substantially united behind these goals. However, on the climate challenge, that is increasingly not the case. The debate is not simply around the detail, the individual policy choices, a cut and thrust that is vital if we are to reach the right conclusions. Instead, for some, it is on the very validity of the priority itself. As I look around the world, as I reflect on the developing political debate within the United Kingdom, I see an ever stronger pushback against the very idea of a climate crisis, against the very need to act. It is pushback based on arguments that fly in the face of the science, absolutely. But of even greater concern, it is a rejection that flies in the face of reality. A reality that includes more violent storms, more severe droughts, a reality of devastating forest fires and life-changing floods. Indeed, for me, the climate challenge is made most real when I visit constituents, as I have done for some time, left distraught by the damage caused by flooding, damage to their homes, to the bricks and mortar, made all the worse by the heart-rending destruction of irreplaceable personal possessions. Climate change, quite literally, is not a figment of our collective imagination. It is not something happening over there, safely out of sight and out of mind. As we saw with Storm Aylwin, one of the worst storms to hit Scotland in recent years, climate change is happening here and now in real time, with direct and damaging effects in our towns, in our countryside, and in people's everyday lives. A theme of my speeches has been the importance of setting ourselves ambitious national goals. And of course, we have had for a good number of years now a series of clear and indeed very challenging goals in the climate space. But more than that, the speeches have been a call for collaboration. We will only achieve our goals by working together more effectively at all levels of government and beyond government. That includes collaboration to develop the right policy solutions, as well as partnership to ensure their implementation. I'll repeat those calls this morning and set out some specific practical proposals to take this collaboration forward. But in climate policy, I believe that something more is needed. We must unite also for a more fundamental purpose, to make a renewed case for the value, for the necessity of climate action itself, to mobilise the middle, the mainstream, against the ever more strident calls for climate inaction from the right. Not only does our planet depend on it, but so too our people's very prosperity and their well-being. My own view on this is crystal clear. For the sake of our future, we must get this right. The responsibility is mine, but not mine alone. The responsibility is my government's, but not my government's alone. It is, as you all recognise through your own actions, as you all demonstrated so many ways already, the responsibility of each and every one of us. There is a case based on the science, based on the numbers, based on the real-world effects that we see, that has already persuaded all of us in this room and already persuaded many others outside of this room. But if we are to truly mobilise the country behind our climate ambitions, there is a different case to be made. The world is changing around us quite literally in terms of global temperature rises. It is a time of growing uncertainty, an age of anxiety. In response, too many are offering easy answers when what we need are the right answers. We're facing a world where a temperature increase of 2 degrees is not only a possibility, but one we must now actively prepare for. It serves no one to deny this reality and all that it will mean. Instead, it calls on us to be bold. Because if we get this right, we will be more resilient. Our communities will be better protected into the future. If we get this right, there will be an economic benefit. Scotland's greatest contribution to the global climate challenge is our renewable energy potential, our technical expertise, and our capacity for innovation. We can help other bigger economies in their transition away from carbon-intensive energy generation and carbon-intensive industry. If we are to persuade people to back climate action wholeheartedly, we must speak not only of the costs and the challenges, which there will be, but also demonstrate clear and direct household and community benefits where these are possible. Tangible benefits at home in terms of more jobs, lower energy bills, and new economic opportunities, delivering also tangible benefits for the planet. And because there is no effective climate action that does not include nature, if we get this right, the prize is a protected and even restored natural environment with all the benefits that will bring in itself, and also the benefits for our health and our well-being as a country. Scotland is famed for her landscapes, for her natural beauty, landscapes that offer food for the soul, as I know from my own experience spent running, walking and cycling in different corners of our land. What better legacy to pass on, safe and secure, to future generations of Scots? This struggle is often presented as existential, and in so many ways it is, but it's also deeply personal. The right choices in the face of the climate challenge are not only essential for our planet, but they can be beneficial also for all of us in the here and the now. I use the term right choices deliberately because getting this right should never be reduced to a mere carbon calculation. It should never become simply a question of totting up emissions. Reducing carbon emissions is imperative, but if we are to re-win the argument for climate action, if we are to take people with us and turn good intention into effective action, then necessary reductions must be achieved with due consideration for the wider impact on our society and our economy. Over the past decades, Scotland's economy has been significantly dependent on oil and gas. Now we are living through a period of change, a period of accelerating transition away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. The baton is being passed. The new is being built on the strong foundations offered by the old. We've seen economic transformations in Scotland before. Etched deep in our collective memory are the images of deindustrialisation, of mining communities left devastated, of a generation of skilled workers abandoned by the government of Margaret Thatcher. The mistakes made then will not be repeated today. This transition will abandon no community. The importance of safeguarding jobs and livelihoods in this respect has never been more stark than in the immediacy of the situation at Grangemouth. I've heard people describe this as the first big test of the just transition, and they are correct. It is a test for my government, and it's a test for the United Kingdom government. If we are going to ensure a future for the site, opportunities for its highly skilled workforce, investment is needed now. That's why yesterday I announced that the Scottish Government will amend the budget at this late stage to allocate an additional £25 million for a just transition fund for Grangemouth. It is money raised through the ScotWind offshore leasing round, and I can think of no better way to invest those resources. Some of the first fruits of our renewable energy wealth supporting a green industrial future for this iconic and hugely important industrial site. Today, I urge the United Kingdom Government to at least match our funding and to use the powers that they have to go further. Ministers in London have supported development of sustainable aviation fuel in Teesside. In recent months, They've announced plans for carbon capture and storage in Teesside and Merseyside. Grangemouth could have benefited from both, but has ended up benefiting from neither. And I would say to the United Kingdom Government, it's not too late. Giving Grangemouth a share in the development of sustainable aviation fuel would be a good first step. Giving a green light to the crucially important Acorn carbon capture and storage project in Buchan would be another. A whole host of new possibilities for Grangemouth would emerge with that decision. If this is a government for the whole of the United Kingdom, then Scotland should be getting its fair share of UK-wide investments. Quite simply, it is time for the United Kingdom Government to turn warm words into actions and to stop treating Scotland as an afterthought. Ensuring a just transition is not the only complex challenge that we face. Despite good progress, there is still work to be done, for example, to reduce emissions from transport and with domestic heating, both of which I will come back to in the course of my comments today. There are important questions centred on policy prescriptions and a genuine debate about which levers are the most effective to pull. But if we are to take people with us on this absolutely necessary path of change, we cannot ignore other parts of the equation. Right now, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, it is necessary also to ask which levers we can pull without putting too much strain on already stressed family finances. How can we motivate and mobilise those who are most capable of making climate-friendly choices so they do make climate-friendly changes while offering the right support to enable and encourage those for whom change at the moment feels impossible? What is the right balance of incentive? As a government, we have some answers, but in the face of such a fast-changing world, we do not yet have complete answers to these sorts of questions, which is why collaboration with you and a thoughtful engagement with the wider public is so important. I can understand why many of us feel overwhelmed by the nature and the scale of the climate challenge. We wonder what difference our individual small actions can make when we are talking about literally planet-changing forces. Last week, I visited Papa Westray, one of the remotest islands in the Orkney archipelago, a community of around 70 people, and I was struck both by the fragility of their existence and by the strength of the community they had. A strength that was vital if they were to overcome the multiple challenges of life on one of the remotest islands in our land, but a strength that was in many ways created by their vulnerability, in many ways born out of the community's fragility. The lesson for me is clear. In the face of adversity, the right response is to come together. It is to recognise and celebrate the fact that the whole is but a series of small but important parts. I see that too in the work of the Climate Cafe Network, headquartered in Burnham in my own constituency. From the smallest of beginnings, conversations between neighbours in a small Scottish town, something truly significant and inspiring has emerged, with climate cafes now active on 6 continents, discussing and debating the issues and the actions that people can take to address the issue of climate within their own communities. Inspiration too in the work of the Scottish Government's Community Climate Action Hubs. Both networks of ordinary people coming together to identify local responses to climate change, offering both practical support and, just as important, encouragement and hope. Our actions, our choices can and do make a difference. These examples demonstrate personal resilience. They demonstrate community resilience. But have no doubt, as we look to these coming decades, our capacity for resilience, individual, community and national, becomes all the more important. Indeed, it may become our defining characteristic. The sort of resilience that will come through the creation of a more extensive circular economy here in Scotland. I think of examples supported by government but powered by people, like the Stirling Reuse Hub, which is saving tonnes of household goods from landfill while enabling local artisans to upcycle unwanted wood and furniture to create revenue and support the local economy. The Stirling Reuse Hub represents a shift in mentality that makes the best of another piece of old wisdom. When you buy new, why buy new if you can restore, reuse or repair? And in a cost of living crisis, ideas such as repair cafes, distribution collectives for unused food and tool libraries are catching on because they make sense for our planet and for our pockets. But what more must we do as decision makers, as leaders in our sectors, our communities, or in our country as a whole, to make examples such as this commonplace every day? How do we turn them from the exception into the norm? Resilience also through the choices we make about our lived environment. Trees and greenery in our towns and cities as a source of shade and cooling for the warmer years ahead. Heat waves that will come with increasing intensity, yes, even here in Scotland. Urban greenery planned and put into effect in collaboration with local communities themselves, as we have been doing, so that government choices genuinely reflect local needs and local aspirations. Increased woodland cover acting not only as a carbon store, but as a means of supporting biodiversity, but part of a natural protection against the extremes of flooding and drought. And have no doubt, we will increasingly see both of these extremes here in Scotland. There are many other examples I could give, and you too will have examples of actions and projects in your own sphere that are contributing to a more climate-resilient Scotland. I could speak also about the Scottish National Adaptation Plan, which I launched last September, a powerful document which sets out both a clear vision and practical tools for people as they prepare for and adapt to the growing impacts of climate change. But my sense is that you will also tell me that as a nation, we are still not doing enough, that Scotland is still not ready for the changed world that is fast approaching. So how else can we shape our towns, cities and countryside? How else can we shape our lives to prepare us for the new reality that is coming as surely as night follows day? For me, an essential part of that answer is making sure that economics work for both people and planet. That's why we've put so much effort and investment into making the most of Scotland's enormous green energy resources. However, simply producing the energy is not sufficient. There must also be clear, tangible benefits for families and households here in Scotland. If we are to persuade people to accept the pain associated with some climate-friendly initiatives, then that must be matched and more by the gains that flow from others. That does mean the creation of a supply chain for a renewable energy sector here in Scotland to deliver a green reindustrialisation of our land, good jobs, well-paid jobs, and a resurgence of economic opportunity around our coast. And we are investing to make that happen. It means lower energy costs for both households and businesses, and it means meaningful community benefits in those areas that play host to energy infrastructure. Lower energy costs, in particular lower electricity costs, begin to transform too the economics of the transition to more climate-friendly transport and home heating. Recently, I had the honour of opening the world's first hydrogen-powered homes, part of SGN's H100 initiative in Leavenmouth in Fife. It's a shining example of how Scotland is leading the way in finding solutions to tackle climate change. Innovation that will not only support the energy transition, but also provide new skills and opportunities within the local economy. It is a test, a beginning, but a clear signal of the path that we must take, because changing the way we heat our homes is essential. That's why the government's budget includes £300 million to support the installation of clean heating systems and energy efficiency measures in more Scottish homes and businesses. Now, I may get into trouble from the Finance Secretary if I preempt future budget decisions, but I think we all recognise that if we are to succeed in decarbonising heating, substantial investment will be necessary for many years to come. Leavenmouth, of course, has only recently become the terminus of a new stretch of railway, a decision taken on both environmental and economic regeneration grounds. It is part of a significant investment in rail infrastructure in Scotland in recent years, investment that has seen extensive electrification of our busiest commuter lines, a strategic decision and one that is bearing fruit, because transport is both an opportunity and a challenge to our climate ambitions. Transport emissions, though reducing, are still far too high. Scotland is fundamentally a sparsely populated rural nation with over 90 inhabited islands. The ability to move people, goods and services around Scotland and beyond is a key building block for growth, and it is quite simply a necessity if we are to ensure strong and sustainable island and rural communities. Finding low-cost and low-carbon ways to do so is therefore essential. It's why new stations are being opened. It's why the EV charging network is being expanded and why zero-emission buses are being provided. It's why we've expanded free bus travel to younger Scots with the hope of getting them into the habit of bus travel, as well as offering a wide range of discounts on rail fares. Much achieved, yes, but more to do, including finding ways to support a step change in the decarbonisation of other aspects of our transport system, including the haulage sector. Each and every one of the 37,000 trucks on our roads must be replaced by zero-emission models in the next few decades, and we must create the energy infrastructure to support them. This is a challenge which requires a new level of collaborative working across the energy, transport, skills and the financial services sectors, and it will be a central focus within the government's next climate change plan. I said earlier that there is no effective climate action without nature, and to go back to Leavenmouth, we see another example of this in practice. In September last year, I witnessed a remarkable project that's breathing life back into the River Leven. Throughout the Industrial Revolution, the River Leven supported mills along its banks. With the industry long gone, the dam that had powered them had become a barrier, removing fish from migrating upriver. I saw the local workforce put the finishing touches to a river restoration project that now allows fish to migrate while holding back floodwaters in new wetland areas for nature and people. This is exactly the sort of project that delivers the best of all possible worlds. Nature restored, a community asset rediscovered, and a town that's better protected from the impacts of climate change. Nature must be at the very heart of our climate actions, whether it is community-led initiatives like sea wilding in Loch Craignich or Restoration Forth, restoring native oysters, a keystone species which improves water quality and seagrass and increasingly an important carbon sink. Or government-led projects such as Scotland's ambitious Peatland Action Partnership, which aims to restore 250,000 hectares of peatland by 2030, and in doing so, reduce Scotland's emissions for decades to come. These are all things that we can be incredibly proud of, projects big and small, local and national. And this morning, I've offered you a range of such examples, actions that are already being taken in many parts of Scotland. Now, given your engagement and expertise, you will be aware of many of these projects already and many others into the bargain. I could have offered more ideas and reflections on these projects, but the point of today is not for me to claim that enough is being done, because it isn't, or that we are already perfectly set on the right course, because we aren't. My advisors keep on telling me to be careful about admitting to shortcomings, to being too frank that things are not yet good enough. But as I've said before, in so many ways, what we have and what we are doing is good, but it can and it should be better. And that's the real purpose of today. The collective energy, wisdom and enthusiasm in this room is what has delivered good, and it is also what can deliver better. My approach to government has always been collaboration, which is why I want this to be the start of an ongoing conversation with a focus on action and on delivery. My government's door is open, and I want to hear from you about how best we can make this discussion work. I believe that we can only make the progress and map out the necessary steps on our climate journey by bringing together local and central government, agencies, stakeholders, trade unions, community organisations and the wider public. And my guarantee to you is this, that I will provide the leadership because I take this issue seriously. A Scotland bowed down and buckled by the effects of climate change is not a Scotland I want to see, especially given the opportunities for transformational change that do exist. And what I ask of you in return is your participation, your honesty, and your willingness to bring your expertise, your ideas to the table. The voices for climate in action are getting louder, so we must speak too, loud and clear, making a case for climate action that does bring benefits for Scotland and for the planet as a whole. Climate action that does mean a more resilient Scotland, that does mean a wealthier and a fairer Scotland, that does protect this priceless earth, our common home. Climate action that enables us to pass on this precious inheritance, this beautiful country that we call home, to many, many future generations of Scots. Thank you very much. As I said, ladies and gentlemen, this is the start of a conversation, and we'll come on to have an exchange of views in the question and answer session. But before I do that, I'm going to take three questions from broadcasters. I'll speak to the news media once I've finished, and then once I've taken these three questions, I'll then open up for questions from the gathering here, and my colleagues have microphones. So I'll come first of all to Kevin Keane from BBC.
First Minister, thank you. If you look at the stats for greenhouse gas emissions over the last decade, the only 2 points where there's been meaningful change has been when Longanic closed in 2016 and when the pandemic hit 4 years later. The rest of the time, it's just been a fraction of a degree's change. The Climate Change Committee said that action in Scotland had largely stalled. Audit Scotland says that the plans are vague. You've cut tree planting, you've scrapped most of the greenhouse gas emissions targets, and you've taken money out of nature restoration budgets to pay for local government pay settlements. First Minister, doesn't the evidence suggest that actually tackling climate change is very much not one of your priorities?
Obviously, I'm going to take a different view to that, Kevin, but of course we're involved in a debate and discussed about these things, so we'll work our way through these different questions. The Scottish Government has faced in the last 3 years intense fiscal pressures as a consequence of rampant inflation. And as a consequence of that, we've had to take some decisions to live within our resources. And that's been challenging. And I've explained all of that to Parliament and to the public. But I think what I would urge you to look at is the programme that the government is setting out at this moment. And climate action is one of the 4 key priorities of my government. And then look at the budget provisions that have been put in place to reinforce that, which see us tripling the investments that have been taken forward in relation to the support of offshore renewables, that sustain the investment in the electrification of the transport network, and indeed expand that electrification programme as we speak, that take measures, for example, to invest in the work that has to be undertaken on heat in buildings, and indeed is supporting the expansion of tree planting activity, peatland restoration, and a variety of other nature and biodiversity restoration projects. So I think there'll always be financial challenges, but what I've tried to do since I came into office as First Minister is focus the government on tangible achievements and tangible points of delivery. And that's exactly the focus and the heart of our action on climate. But today, what I signal is the necessity for us to work with a whole variety of different organisations in Scotland to make sure this is a priority for all of us and that we can achieve our objectives as a consequence. And that will be at the heart of the government's programme. Ewan Petrie from STV.
Thank you, First Minister. You mentioned there the importance of the need for collaboration with local authorities among other bodies. You've said previously that there shouldn't be the need for a significant rise in council tax, and yet yesterday we saw the first local authority announce a double-digit increase. So isn't the reality that people across Scotland should expect to see their council tax go up considerably as a result of the pressures facing local authorities right now?
Well, I've just, in relation Kevin's question, I've just relayed the challenges that exist within the public finances. So, I'd be the first to accept there are challenges in the public finances. Local authorities will make their own decisions about the council tax level. I've given my view about my advice as to what those levels should be like, and it will be up to local authorities to democratically decide and to be accountable for their actions. But for my part, what have I done? Well, what I've done is I've delivered a real terms increase in core local authority funding, which has been contributed to local authorities. There's been a £1 billion increase in local authority funding in this forthcoming financial year. And we've taken forward a discussion with local government about shared priorities, particularly around my key objectives around eradicating child poverty, about strengthening our public services, about stimulating the economy, and, as I set out today, taking action on climate. And local authorities will have to take their decisions. Now, obviously I'm aware of the decision in East Lothian yesterday. There'll be other decisions. I'm certain there'll be local authorities that will announce council tax increases that are significantly lower than the East Lothian level. I'm very confident of that, and I think that'll happen quite soon. So there'll be a variety of these decisions, but local authorities have got to explain their decisions and their rationale to their public. But what I'm confident of is the government has given a really strong local government settlement, and that's been acknowledged by local government. Tony Maguire from GB News. Tony will be the last of the broadcast questions, then I'll come to our colleagues. Tony.
Good morning, First Minister.
Morning.
We spoke about climate sceptics as well as obviously the number of green initiatives happening around Scotland. I would argue there's a third group, we'll call them climate defeatists, when we look across our seas to China and America and the economies there which seem to take a very different approach. What is your message to people who believe that Scotland's contribution to the climate emergency pales in comparison to the damage that those economies are seen to do it, and indeed those planet-changing forces?
I think there's two things I would say to that, Tony. The first is that I don't think anybody can offload the challenges of climate action and the necessity of climate action onto somebody else. So however small a country Scotland is, population of just over £5 million, we can't just say, look, we won't make a big difference to all of this. That's an absolute fallacy. We've got to play our part. However small our country is, we've got our role to play. So that's the first thing. We can't offload and just say, well, there's other people doing much worse than us, so we don't need to do anything. I think that's just an abandonment of our moral responsibility. And the second point is that we can offer leadership. Councillor Aitken mentioned the role that the City of Glasgow occupied in hosting COP, and that gathering put real momentum into the action that was necessary on climate change. Now, I'd be the first to admit that we're in a much diminished position now because of what's happening in other countries. That shouldn't stop us exercising and expressing the leadership necessary to be able to take forward many of these questions, because we quite literally cannot afford not to. We've just gone through just after the turn of the year, we had Storm Éowyn, and our country took an absolute hammering. Our power companies had colossal challenges in restoring power supply because of the ferocity. And they did it really well. They did it very, very quickly. But it was ferocious. And the idea that somehow we can say, well, we can allow lots of that to happen on a recurring basis, we can't. So we've got a responsibility to act, but we've also got a leadership responsibility. And that's what I'm encouraging us to focus on today, that as one of the key priorities that is at the heart of my policy agenda is the necessity to offer that leadership on climate action, and I'm prepared to do so. Thank you to the broadcasters for the questions. Can I now open up to our colleagues who are here with us today, and then I'll come to we'll come to print journalists later on. I'll take just the lady in front here and to There's a microphone just coming to you there. So.
Good morning, First Minister. Tassine Jaffrey from Glasgow Caledonian University. First Minister, it was really wonderful to hear your opening remarks about that recognition, the impact of our changing climate is having on people's lives. It's not just about infrastructure. And I think moving forward, it's so important that we place people right at the heart of our climate policy and our frameworks going forward. A piece of work that we've just finished with Glasgow City Council, looking at meaningful engagement, one of the things that we found was the blocks in getting people on board this conversation, because they don't see the value necessarily in some of the things that we are proposing to put forward. And I think one of the things perhaps what I would like you to perhaps reflect on is how we can ensure that when we move forward, we embrace the societal makeup of Scotland and its people and the diversity, and ensuring that those voices who are always left behind are brought into the picture. Because in the conversations, it's the same voices, the same faces, the same communities that get to go forward. And I'm keen to know how we break the back of that.
Well, it's a very important question. And some of the examples that I cited were designed to try to address the fact that it's at the heart of your question, which is there are communities that invariably get left behind in many societal changes. And actually, some of those communities will benefit from measures to increase the sustainability of those communities and their own households within those communities. I also think that, and what I've tried to do in the formulation of the government's agenda, is to recognise that the four main priorities of government don't exist in neat little compartments. There's connections between them. So the eradication of child poverty and the need to take action on climate and the need to stimulate economic activity are all interconnected themes. I think at the heart of responding to your question is the key point that there has to be effective community engagement and participation. And it is an absolute prerequisite. So when I look at the successful initiatives that have taken place, where there's been high degrees of motivation in taking effective climate action, what's at the heart of it? Community engagement. So when I cited the start of the Climate Cafe Network from Burnham in my own constituency, the community in Dunkelton Burnham engaged in a project with Scottish Water to encourage all households to reduce their water consumption by to support sustainability, to reduce power use. And the project was immensely successful just by very simple changes that people were persuaded and encouraged to do because people were engaged in the process. They felt part of the initiative. So there'll be countless examples like that we can take forward that make an impact on people's lives. But at the heart of it has to be community engagement. And when I look at the challenges, the projects that public authorities want to take forward, then the ones that make a difference and that make an impact invariably have good, effective community engagement at their heart. Thank you. I'll take gentleman just there with the open neck, that one there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, First Minister. And in these darkening days of denial, it's really good to hear your total commitment and your government's total commitment to taking forward climate action. And I'm sure everybody in the room here believes that collaboration is the way to deliver. But there is that well-worn phrase that raises alarm bells in my mind that if it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And it is an emergency, and I think you will agree that we need total determination and urgency in delivery. And from my professional experience, I'm retired now, but the way to drive forward delivery in a situation where you need so much cross-functional, cross-disciplinary delivery is through professional program management. And I'm wondering if in the forthcoming climate change plan that you said will have a central focus on collaboration, you're looking at ways of actually making that happen. Traditionally within government, that can be perhaps best affected by appointing commissioners, or in UK government parlance now, heads of mission control, in order to put in place fully structured professional program management to make that collaboration actually work rapidly and effectively. I wondered if you had any views on that.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, because delivery is the key. We've got to make sure it actually happens. And I think you make an important point, which I referred to in my previous answer a moment ago, that there is a need for, well, there's a need for leadership, and I'm standing here in front of you saying, well, here I am, and I'll get, and I'll give it, and I'll be held to account for it, and I welcome that. But there also has to be a lot of integrated cross-portfolio activity and cross-disciplinary activity within government and public authorities. And what I'm trying to do in government is to bring a very sharp sense of alignment to what we're trying to achieve. I think it is becoming, well, people can judge whether that's the case, but I'm certainly putting a lot of personal leadership into making sure there is alignment around achieving our objectives on child poverty, on making sure we achieve our objectives in climate action, and the improvements necessary in our public services and in the economy. So, yes, these arrangements have to be put in place to make sure we've got the absolute focus of policy to achieve our objectives, but there has to be an intense focus on delivery. And over the course, we're obviously going through a budget process. We'll conclude that next Tuesday. That then gives us the line of sight as to what we're able to deliver in the next financial year, which is a crucial year for the government and for the country. And I'll be setting out exactly the approach that I intend to take to the delivery of these objectives. But crucially, I suppose at the heart of my speech today is an invitation to this community and to others to come with us and to engage with us about how best we can achieve those objectives, and to learn from some of the wisdom that there is in Scotland about how best to ensure we've got a focus on delivery and achieving our objectives, which is at the heart of what I want to do. Okay, we'll go to Jamie Livingston there.
Thank you, First Minister. Jamie Livingston from Oxfam. Your speech was very much framed around making the right choices, but would you agree that to take people with us, as you rightly said, is needed? We also need to make choices that are patently fair, including how this transition is paid for. And given that Scotland's richest households emit 4 times more than the lowest income households, isn't it time that we start to take action to make the bigger and richer polluters pay for their damage? And you mentioned transport, but not aviation. And isn't an obvious place to start with a fair tax on the 13,000 private jets that are using Scotland's airports every year? The power to introduce that tax rests in Scotland. So will you now commit to developing the fair exemption that's needed for the Highlands and Islands, submitting that exemption to the Competition and Markets Authority prior to the Scottish elections, and then get on and deliver the air departure tax? Thanks.
I'm actually very sympathetic to this point, Jamie, and very supportive of the point about increased taxation on private jets. So in principle, I'm supportive. I think, with the greatest respect, I think you stretch the question that it's already in our hands. We've not managed to get past the exemption issues about the Highlands and Islands. But take from what I'm saying today that I'm very sympathetic. My Transport Secretary is here, and everyone who knows Fiona Hislop knows that she's a formidable Transport Secretary. So that's something of which I'm very supportive. And we'll take that away, and we'll see what further impetus we can put into it. But there are challenges with air departure tax, which are not easy to get past to protect the situation in the Highlands and Islands. But we'll give it our best. Thank you. Right, I'll take the pink here, please.
Thank you. Elspeth MacDonald, Scottish Fishermen's Federation. First Minister, you touched today on the potential of renewable energy from Scotland's seas, and clearly we have to have a transition away from our economy based on fossil fuels. And we've spoken many times to your government about the significant challenges that the expansion of offshore renewable energy will bring for our industry. And I urge you and your government to continue to prioritise renewable food production from our seas as well as renewable energy. But more widely, in the marine space, it feels to us at the moment like a very policy-heavy environment. And notwithstanding the urgency that that climate change brings upon us all, we do have concerns that the Scottish Government often wishes to be seen to be doing things fast rather than necessarily doing the right things. So can you assure us today that your government will take the time to make sure that this action plan is doing the right things rather than just doing the things that might seem attractive because they can be done quickly? Thank you.
Thanks, Elspeth, and I acknowledge the importance of the issues and the perspective of your industry within the interaction in the marine environment. So and we've obviously had a lot of dialogue on these questions, and I very much look forward to continuing that. When I look at the commentary about government, I don't often see a lot of evidence of the government being accused of going too fast. It's not an accusation that I feel commonly exposed to, but I do get, I'm being flippant about that point, but I assure you that we will do things properly, with care and with proper consultation and engagement. That's the basis of good decision making, and we have to also look at all of the issues that are affecting particular policy choices, and within the space of climate action we will make sure that we consider all of these questions as part of an orderly process. But I do come back to my point that we do face an urgent set of circumstances about which we have got to which we have got to give leadership, and I'm here committed to doing exactly that. Right, yes, gentleman there.
Thank you, First Minister. And my name is Michael Cook. I'm with Circular Communities Scotland. Really welcome the shout-out you gave to one of our members, the Stirling Reuse Hub. And I just want to reflect on that question about reuse. Reuse actually can help with all 4 of the Scottish Government's priorities. And even just thinking about what they do in Stirling, they reduce the cost of goods to low-income families, which helps with poverty. They create jobs, which helps grow the economy. For example, Ireland last year introduced a reuse target, 20 kilograms per head of population, which is about at least double the level of reuse that they currently have. I'm aware of the mantra that a target without a plan is just a wish, but we would love to see reuse targets in Scotland, also ambitious ones, and with a plan to move reuse into the mainstream middle, as you mentioned. And you talked about collaboration and your door being open. I wonder if there's an opportunity to meet with you or someone in your team to discuss that.
We'll very happily engage on that question. Alistair Allen, my Climate Action Minister, is here with me today, so we'll be very happy to follow up on these questions. I think it's a really interesting way to position the action of a venture like Stirling Reuse, because it does reach into all of the government's priorities. And it's a key issue for me that we don't, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've felt in government over many years is that government can often operate in compartments, and you have to establish the linkages, and I'm sort of renewing and rewiring government to make sure that we do all of that. So it's a key consideration to make sure that we make the most of those opportunities. But I think the question of reuse targets is an interesting one to explore, and we'll be happy to have those conversations. Thank you. Yes, down here. I'll go to the back.
Thank you, First Minister. Jack Norquay from Scottish Renewables. Thank you for your very welcome remarks on the need for climate action this morning. Also great to hear recognition for Papa Westray in your speech. As a very proud Orcadian. It was also welcome to hear in your speech, First Minister, your point around the need to sustain investment in decarbonising heat and energy efficiency. That's going to be a really important step in our transition, both to net zero, but also to deliver warmer, cleaner and more affordable energy for consumers. So could I ask, as part of that, there will be a need to attract significant levels of private sector investment to help in that climate action. So what steps can the Scottish Government take to ensure private investment will continue to flow into initiatives like energy efficiency? And on the point of clean heat, I'd be grateful if you could provide an update on the Heat and Buildings Bill and what the government's intention is behind that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And I'm glad my visit to Papa Westray has brought you some joy. It certainly brought me a lot of joy last week, I can tell you. On the substance of your point, the transition to net zero cannot be achieved simply by public investment. It's just not possible. So there has to be the activation of private investment. A crucial part of that is the creation of policy certainty. If you look at the decarbonisation of power networks in Scotland over the last 20 years, that has, in my view, been achieved by a combination of two things: absolute policy certainty from the Scottish Government and significant private investment from consumers and the power companies. And that's the type of... So we know what works. We know what the formula is. And what I would say is that we have to concentrate on making sure that policy certainty exists to enable us to trigger the private investment. And certainly in the discussion, as you'll probably be aware, the Deputy First Minister is leading on investment attractiveness issues within the government. She is doing extraordinary amount of work in reaching out to investors, and she and I were involved in discussions just yesterday with a whole range of offshore renewable investors who actually talked very positively about the attractiveness of Scotland as a destination for investment because of the absolute policy certainty that exists and which we have provided. And we need to make sure that's replicated in the issues in relation to domestic heating and to other options. In relation to the Heat and Buildings Bill, the Government is continuing to develop the policy propositions and intend to bring proposals forward to Parliament in the course of this parliamentary term. Okay, yes, I'll take the lady here.
Thank you. Anne McCall, RSPB. Firstly, thank you for your commitment and your passion in what you've said this morning. And it'll be no shock that I wholeheartedly agree that nature should be at the heart of any climate action. So I guess my question, therefore, was why Scottish Government has decided not to use the opportunity of recent changes to agricultural funding to require more climate and nature action, but instead rather to reinforce the status quo. As one of the major sources of greenhouse gases and the recipient of over £600 million of public money each year, is this not a huge missed opportunity to support a sector that is ripe for transition and key to delivering climate action?
I think the question comes down to how, essentially many of the themes that I've talked about in my speech, to how that transition is pursued. And I think the best way to do that in the agricultural sector is to recognise, first of all, the necessity for fiscal sustainability, which is at the heart of this, why I'm kind of very concerned about some of the changes to taxation that the United Kingdom government is proposing, because I think it really affects sustainability of many ventures within Scotland. So by taking an approach which supports fiscal sustainability, but which puts on the requirement to make that transition to a more sustainable future. And that's the process that we are engaged with. I don't view it as a sort of either-or situation in the discussion and deliberations with the farming sector, but that we use the opportunity of financial sustainability and stability to enable the industry to make that transition. And then if you look at the investment funds that we're putting in, for example, through the additional resources that are going in this year, they are going to be going into adaptation schemes to enable the industry to adapt to a low emissions future. And that direction of travel is woven into the government's policy approach to farming. Right, the lady there, and I think I'm getting a question. I think I'm getting told that I've got a couple of minutes. Is that right? 5 minutes. Okay. Right, lady there in the white, in the cream jacket, please.
Thank you, First Minister. Jamie Toney from the University of Glasgow. As I've listened to your answers, I recognize an embedded sense of systems approaches and systems thinking, because I've been privileged over the past, since about 2020, to be skilling people in systems thinking and decision making. The purpose behind this is about doing things differently, about helping people find agency in terms of climate action, and also about changing mindsets. I've been fortunate to find pots of money through the Scottish Funding Council's upskilling, and now moved to some of the research councils for funding this. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about the skills agenda in terms of climate action and where you see that moving in terms of Scottish Government.
Thanks for your question. I think there's a, in relation to how we engage people in the process of climate action, I think we have to be conscious, and this is why I spent so much time talking about the measures and the initiatives that we can take to change, to get people on board and to win people's confidence to the agenda, because there is so much material and argument which is encouraging people not to take that view. So we have to recognise there's a hearts and minds argument that's got to be won. And I think some of the measures that I've talked about will help us in that respect, but we need to have an intense focus on that in our agenda. In relation to skills, I think that, again, there is a transition that's got to be made. And I'm struck in my discussions with various organisations who are involved in the transition, their plea to me, and it was been made to me again last night in a discussion I was having with renewables organisations, about ensuring the adaptability of our skills offering to the needs of the new marketplace. And it's needed now. So we need to be making those adjustments in provision and proposition, and institutions, colleges, universities, partnerships between private companies and institutions will be central to how we take forward that agenda. So making sure that we are constantly refreshing the skills offerings that we have, the dialogue with private companies, making sure that the investment that private companies are making a lot of skills development activity. I think about some of the investments that companies like Scottish Power and Scottish Southern Energy are making in the development of the skills base in partnership with some of our college organisations. It's really impressive. It shows a great commitment to the future of climate action. And I think that type of partnership model is a significant asset for us as we move forward. Okay, we'll take a couple more questions, please. And I'll take the gentleman here in the blue jumper, and then I'll take the gentleman just at the back there.
Stuart Hazeldine, University of Edinburgh. A different type of question. You briefly mentioned industrial base at Grangemouth and how Teesside and Merseyside are being fitted with carbon minimisation capture. But we've still got the problem that governments have to consent or not consent future oil and gas fields, Rosebank and Jackdaw being the current examples. What message would you send to the government in Westminster about their current dilemma of whether to consent or not consent future hydrocarbon fields?
This is obviously a very difficult question, which has obviously been aired and determined very recently by a number of significant and landmark court judgments. So if you forgive me, Stuart, I'll not give a 5-hour answer to this particular complex question, but it is an important one. And I think what lies, if I can shorten the very significant and deep judgments that have been made on this question, the court judgments essentially hinge on the whole question of whole life carbon impact. And that is the key point. That is the key point that can't... Now, if you actually look at what the Scottish Government has marshalled as our input into this debate, we've essentially said exactly that. We've been saying that for years, that you have to look at the whole life carbon impact of propositions if you are going to consent them. So I'm not, in that sense, I'm not surprised by the court judgments, because they essentially reflect the thinking that we've put into this. If you're going to, if you are going to take forward propositions of this type, you have to consider, or if you're going to consider them, these are the issues that have to be mindful. So I suppose that's my contribution to the discussion. I would encourage the UK government to consider deeply the implications of those rulings and the whole question of whole life carbon impact, because that is the only sustainable judgment you can arrive at in considering these questions. Right, last question from the gentleman up there, and then we'll need to draw it to halt.
Thank you, First Minister. David Fleetwood from the John Muir Trust. Really welcome your mention of the role of nature, Scotland's wild places in responding to the climate crisis and indeed supporting our mental health. With the Land Reform and Natural Environment Bill in the Chamber, or about to be in the Chamber, we've got the opportunity to put in place a framework which will support landscape scale change. So I'm interested in how you'll ensure these bills support some of the vision that you've set out, change at the pace and scale that you've talked about today. And in the spirit of the collaboration you asked for, how can we help you to achieve that?
I think, well, on that last point, David, I think by contributing your best thoughtfulness to that process, and government will consider that and weigh it up as part of the process. I'm very struck, I cited an example in my speech about the river restoration project in the River Leven, and that's an example where approaches have been taken to try to meet a multiplicity of different objectives, but one of them is to provide greater flood prevention certainty for communities at the estuary. And I'm very much reminded of I used to have the privilege of representing the city of Brecon, and the city of Brecon introduced very significant and highly controversial flood defences, and they were unfortunately unable to withstand the pressure of storms in October 2023. And when I look at that, the only conclusion I can come to is that you need whole landscape solutions to the challenge, because you will never be able to withstand that degree of flooding, that impact as it presented itself in Brecon, which means entire landscapes have got to be brought into it. Now that's a complex process, because there'll be multiple interested parties and multiple and diverse interests. And I think what we've got to have is a policy framework that enables us to reconcile all of those questions and to enable us to take the type of bold actions that will deliver that degree of protection. So that would lie at the heart of my thinking on this question. So look, thank you all very much. As I said, this is the start of a conversation. I look forward to invite you to participate in that, and I look forward to the fruits of that conversation. There is tea and coffee down this way, which I hope will help you to heat up a little bit. It's not been the warmest day in Scotland, but it's been a welcome opportunity to engage on these questions with you, and thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.